Rain fell like it was trying to erase the city. Sheets of it slammed against glass, drowning the skyline in a blur of silver and shadow. From the top floor of the Cross Tower, Adrien Cross watched it all from behind a wall of windows. The city he'd built his empire on looked small from up here. Tiny moving lights, distant sirens, people who didn't know his name but lived in the world his company had shaped. He should have felt proud. Instead, all he felt was tired. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the spreadsheets glowing on his monitor. Numbers. Endless numbers. Profits. Projections. Algorithms. All whispering that he was winning. And yet, for all the success, his penthouse felt like a tomb. The walls were too white, the silence too heavy. Even the rain outside sounded lonely. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and let out a low sigh. Maybe it was time to shut everything down for the night. Maybe tomorrow he'd feel something different. But then, something cut through the sound of the storm. A muffled shout, then a crash. At first, he ignored it. You learned to do that in the city. Noise meant chaos, and chaos was someone else's problem. But the sound came again, closer this time. A thud, sharp and heavy, like a body hitting wet pavement. Adrien hesitated, staring at his reflection in the window. The logical part of his brain told him to stay put. Call security. Let someone else handle it. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he was already on his feet, grabbing his coat as he headed for the elevator. The lobby was nearly empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the security guard's radio. "Everything all right, Mr. Cross?" the guard asked, glancing up from his desk. "Probably nothing," Adrien said, though his pulse had started to quicken. "Just want to check something outside." When the doors opened, the storm hit him like a wall. The rain was relentless, soaking him in seconds. He squinted through the downpour, and that's when he saw her. A woman sat on the sidewalk about 20 feet away, her arms wrapped around her knees, drenched from head to toe. One shoe was missing. Her hair clung to her face, and even from a distance, he could see the tremor in her shoulders. She looked small, fragile, but there was something fierce about the way she tried to stand, wincing in pain, refusing to stay down. Adrien approached cautiously, his shoes splashing through puddles. "Hey, are you all right?" Her head lifted, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Her eyes, dark, tired, defiant, met his. "Do I look all right?" she said, her voice hoarse but steady. He almost smiled. "Fair point. What happened?" "Someone grabbed my purse," she said, glancing down the empty street. "I chased them. Stupid, I know. I fell." She tried to stand again, but her ankle gave out and she sucked in a sharp breath. Adrien looked around. No one in sight, no cars slowing to help, no pedestrians braving the storm, just the two of them. "Did you call the police?" "With what phone?" she asked bitterly. "That was in the purse, too." He nodded, more to himself than to her. Logic told him this wasn't his problem. Logic told him to walk away. But logic had also given him $1 billion and a life so empty it echoed. "Come with me," he said. Her expression tightened. "Excuse me?" "I live right here," he said, nodding toward the tower behind him. "You need to get warm. Get that ankle checked. I've got a first aid kit, dry clothes, a phone you can use." She hesitated, eyes flicking between him and the building. "You expect me to just follow a stranger into some high-rise?" Adrien exhaled, pushing wet hair off his forehead. "I get it. You don't know me. My name's Adrien. Adrien Cross." Recognition flashed in her eyes, just for a second. "The Adrien Cross?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said, offering a small, weary smile. "But right now, I'm just a guy trying to help." For a long moment, neither moved. The rain poured harder, splattering against her bare arm. Her pride and her pain battled behind her eyes, but in the end, necessity won. "All right," she said finally, her voice soft. "Just for tonight." He helped her up carefully, his hand steady at her back. She leaned on him, limping, cold skin trembling against his. When they stepped through the lobby doors, the security guard's brows lifted, but Adrien didn't offer an explanation. Upstairs, the warmth of the penthouse wrapped around them like another world entirely. Candace Porter, he'd learn her name later, stood dripping on his marble floor, looking out over the city she'd fallen into. Adrien watched her quietly, something unrecognizable tightening in his chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was something far rarer, something he hadn't felt in years. Empathy, and it terrified him. The next morning, sunlight broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows, slicing thin lines of gold across the marble floor. Adrien hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night replaying the storm, the fall, the moment he'd carried her inside, half believing it had been some strange dream. But then he heard it. Movement down the hall, the faint clink of a mug against the counter. Candace was awake. He found her in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of his old t-shirts that hung past her thighs and a pair of gray sweatpants rolled at the waist. Her hair, now dry, curled softly around her face. She looked better, less like a ghost, more like someone trying to remember what safety felt like. "Morning," he said. She jumped slightly, steadying herself on the counter. "Morning. I found the coffee." "You found the best part of this apartment," he said, a trace of humor cutting through his usual reserve. "How's the ankle?" She glanced down. "Still attached. Still mad at me." Adrien smiled before realizing he was smiling. He wasn't used to small talk in his own home. Usually the only sound was the hum of electronics. Seeing another person standing there, pouring coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world, made the place feel different. He moved closer. "Let me wrap it properly. I've got ice and compression tape." "I can do it myself," she said quickly. "Right," he said, stepping back, "but you can't walk on it. Sit." Her eyes narrowed as if weighing whether she should argue. Finally she sighed, lowering herself onto one of the leather stools. "You're very used to giving orders, aren't you?" "It's a side effect of running a company," he said, kneeling beside her. "People usually listen." "Well, I'm not your employee." "I noticed." Her tone softened slightly. "You don't have to do all this. I'll be out of your hair soon." He didn't respond right away. He wrapped the bandage carefully, fingers brushing her skin, surprised by the warmth of it. "There's no rush," he said quietly. "You can stay until you've got somewhere to go." "That could take a while." "I've got time." She gave him a look that could have stripped the veneer off his confidence. "People like you always say that, until you get bored." That stung more than it should have. "Maybe, but I don't think I'm bored yet." Something in her face softened then, a flicker of surprise, maybe gratitude. She opened her mouth to respond, but her stomach growled instead, loud enough to echo. Adrien straightened, biting back a grin. "Pancakes or omelet?" "Pancakes, but only because I don't trust billionaires with eggs." He laughed, an actual laugh, and for a second, he felt normal, human. They ate together at the long dining table that had never hosted anyone before. Between bites, she told him her name, Candace Porter. She'd moved to the city 2 weeks ago. She'd been staying in temporary house, saving up from freelance work until she could afford her own place. She'd had an interview lined up before the robbery. "And now?" he asked. "Now I start over, again." She looked up at him then, eyes fierce. "But I'll figure it out. I always do." He believed her. There was a steadiness beneath her exhaustion, something unbreakable. He envied it. After breakfast, she insisted on washing the dishes despite his protests. Watching her limp slightly as she moved between sink and counter twisted something inside him. He wasn't sure if it was admiration or guilt. When she finished, she turned toward the window. The city stretched before them, sunlight gleaming off rooftops still wet from the storm. "You have quite the view," she said softly. "Yeah," he murmured. "You stop seeing it after a while." "Maybe you just stopped looking," she said. He glanced at her, surprised by the quiet truth in her words. As the day unfolded, she explored the apartment like someone walking through a museum. Every corner fascinated her, the shelves of first editions, the minimalist art, the stillness. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I do." "No family?" "Not anymore." She nodded, sensing the line she shouldn't cross. "Lonely?" He hesitated. "Sometimes." The word hung in the air like a confession. When evening came, Candace tried to insist she'd sleep on the couch. He shook his head and pointed toward the guest room. "You'll be more comfortable there." "This is temporary," she said. "Of course," he replied, though something deep inside him already knew it wouldn't be. Later, he stood outside her door, listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing as she drifted into sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving only the whisper of the city below. Adrien turned off the hallway light and stared at the quiet space between them. He had built his life on logic, precision, and control, yet tonight none of that mattered. Because somewhere in his penthouse, a stranger slept soundly, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel enticed to rely alone. The third morning came quietly, wrapped in the gentle hum of rain against glass. Not a storm this time, just a soft drizzle that blurred the city lights and made everything feel slower, gentler. Adrien stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching droplets trace crooked paths down the glass. Behind him, faint music played, something old, something human. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't mind the sound. Candace was in the kitchen again, humming under her breath as she flipped pancakes. It had become a routine somehow. She refused to let him order breakfast or cater anything, that fancy nonsense, as she called it. She said cooking grounded her, made her feel useful. Adrien didn't argue. He liked watching her move, liked the way her presence filled the hollow spaces in his apartment. "You're quiet this morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I'm always quiet," he replied. "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly. "But this is different. Quiet like you're thinking about something you shouldn't be." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am." She slid a plate in front of him and sat down across the table, steam curled up from the pancakes. "Then maybe you should stop overthinking and just talk." He hesitated. "I'm not very good at that." "Then it's a good time to start." Something about her tone, light but steady, made it impossible to deflect. He took a breath. "When I was building my company, I used to think success would fix everything. The more zeros in my bank account, the quieter the noise in my head would get." "And did it?" He met her gaze. "No, it just made the silence louder." She didn't rush to respond. She just looked at him, really looked. And for a moment, the city vanished. "I get that," she said finally. "I thought leaving my ex would fix everything, that once I was free, I'd feel whole again. But some things don't go away just because you change your surroundings." Their eyes held, two different worlds connected by the same invisible ache. Adrien found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the weight behind her words. "You really have been through it, haven't you?" Her laugh was soft but tinged with bitterness. "We all have. Some of us just hide it better." A silence fell, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, charged with something unspoken. Adrien realized how rare that feeling was, to sit across from someone who didn't need anything from him, not his money, not his reputation, just him. He cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "So what's next? You said you had a job interview before the purse fiasco?" She finished for him. "Yeah, still waiting to hear back. I emailed them yesterday. Hopefully, they'll give me another shot." "I'm sure they will," he said, meaning it. The rest of the day slipped into something easy. Candace insisted on tidying up, even though he told her not to. She moved through the apartment like she belonged there, humming under her breath, the faint scent of lavender following her wherever she went. Adrien found himself watching her from his office doorway more than once, trying to understand why this stranger made his fortress feel like a home. That night, they ended up in the living room with takeout containers between them. She'd found one of his old record players and convinced him to let her put on a record. The crackle of vinyl filled the room, wrapping around them like memory. "You really live up here by yourself?" she asked again, eyes scanning the space. "I do." "No friends, no family dinners, no one dropping by just to say hi?" He smiled ruefully. "People drop by when they want something." "And what do you want?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away because he didn't know how to. Finally, he said, "Peace, I guess." Candace studied him for a moment. "You ever think maybe you already have it, and you just don't let yourself feel it?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and the world seemed to quiet again. Her eyes were tired but warm, her posture relaxed yet strong. She didn't belong in this world of glass and steel, and somehow that was exactly why he needed her here. She smiled then, small, real. "You know what I think, Adrien Cross? I think you hide behind success because it's easier than admitting you're lonely." He exhaled a short laugh. "You're not wrong." "Didn't think I was," she said, turning back toward the window. The city stretched below them, millions of lights blinking like tiny beating hearts. Adrien followed her gaze, feeling something shift inside him. He'd spent years measuring his life in achievements, in power, in control, but now, sitting beside a woman who'd lost almost everything, he felt something far rarer. Warmth. Connection. It terrified him. When she finally excused herself to rest, Adrien stayed in the living room long after she was gone. He stared at the empty couch, at the place her hand had rested when she laughed, and realized that the silence he'd always feared didn't feel so heavy anymore. It wasn't emptiness, it was anticipation, and he couldn't tell if that was more comforting or dangerous. That night, the city didn't sleep. Neon lights flickered against the glass, rain whispered on the balcony, and somewhere below, the sound of tires hissing on wet pavement filled the spaces between Adrien's thoughts. He stood barefoot by the window, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty glass of whiskey dangling from his fingers. He'd spent hours pretending to read emails, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Candace Porter. It had been 3 days since he found her on that storm-soaked street, and in that time, she had turned his sterile, calculated world upside down. The penthouse, once a kingdom of silence, now carried traces of her. The faint hum of her voice, the smell of coffee in the morning, the warmth that lingered long after she left a room. He didn't understand it. He didn't want to understand it. And yet, he couldn't ignore it. A soft sound broke through the quiet. Footsteps. Then, her voice, sleepy, gentle. Couldn't sleep either? He turned. Candace stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket, her curls loose and wild from tossing in bed. The moonlight caught her skin, turning it into something almost unreal, soft bronze and silver. "Sorry," Adrien said, setting his glass down. "Did I wake you?" "No," she said, walking closer. "You couldn't wake me if you tried. I just felt weird sleeping while you're pacing like a ghost in your own home." He smirked slightly. "I didn't realize I was pacing." "You were," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "What's keeping you up?" He hesitated. He could have given the easy answer: work, deadlines, acquisitions. But something about the way she looked at him stripped away the armor he always wore. "Everything," he said quietly. "Everything's a lot," she replied, tucking her legs under herself. "You want to talk about it?" He didn't, but he did. "It's like I've spent my whole life trying to build something indestructible," he said. "A company, a reputation, a future. But lately, it feels like all I've built is distance." Candace's eyes softened. "Distance from what?" "People, myself, the world. Take your pick." The rain thickened outside, a steady rhythm against the windows. For a while, neither spoke. Candace reached for the whiskey glass on the table and took a sip without asking. Adrien raised an eyebrow. "What? You looked like you weren't enjoying it," she said with a half smile. He chuckled, low and genuine. "You're something else." "I get that a lot." But beneath the humor, something heavier hung between them, a current neither of them named. She set the glass down and leaned back, studying him. "You know, for someone with everything, you look like a man carrying too much." "Maybe I am," he said. "Then maybe you should let someone else carry a piece of it." Her words landed deeper than she could have known. Adrien wasn't used to anyone offering help. Not like that. Not without an angle. He wanted to tell her how strange it felt to have someone see through him, but before he could, lightning lit up the room, brief and blinding. The thunder that followed shook the glass. Candace flinched. Her hand instinctively clutched the blanket tighter. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Storms they mess with me sometimes. Remind you of something?" Her eyes flickered. "Of too much." The air between them shifted. Adrien moved closer, slow enough not to startle her. He didn't touch her, he just sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. For a moment, neither said a word. The sound of rain filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then Candace spoke, soft, raw, almost like a confession. "When I was 16, a storm like this one took everything we had. My mom's car spun out on the freeway. She didn't make it." Her voice wavered. "After that, I hated the rain. It always feels like it's trying to take something from me." Adrien felt something break open in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You didn't do anything." "No," he said, "but I wish I could have." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and when she looked at him, really looked, something unspoken passed between them. Not attraction, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. The storm outside swelled, wind rattling the glass. Candace's breath hitched when thunder cracked again, and this time Adrien didn't think, he just acted. He reached out, took her hand gently. Her fingers tensed, then relaxed around his. "It's just noise," he murmured. "It can't touch you here." Her eyes met his, shimmering faintly in the dim light. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to." For a long, fragile moment, time stilled. Two lonely souls sitting inches apart, both fighting battles they'd never named aloud, until now. Then Candace stood, her expression guarded again. "You should sleep, Adrien." He nodded, though his pulse still raced. "You too." She paused at the doorway. "For what it's worth, you're not as cold as you think you are." When she disappeared down the hall, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with the weight of something new, something dangerous. Adrien stared at the spot where she'd stood, his heart heavy and alive in ways it hadn't been in years. The rain kept falling outside, endless and soft, like the city itself was holding its breath. He knew one thing for certain. That woman wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a fault line, and he could already feel the world he built starting to crack. The next morning arrived with a quiet that didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment before something shifts. The rain had finally stopped, but the air still smelled of it, sharp and new. Sunlight slid over the city like it was trying to apologize for the night before. Rien stood by the espresso machine, waiting for the rhythmic hiss that filled the silence between him and his thoughts. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in the flash of lightning, the tremor in her hand when the thunder cracked, the way she'd looked at him before whispering that he wasn't as cold as he thought. He didn't know what unsettled him more, that she'd said it or that she'd been right. The elevator door chimed softly. Candace stepped out of the guest hallway, fully dressed, her curls tied back, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "I made coffee," Adrien said. "Figured you'd—" "I'm leaving," she interrupted. The words hit harder than he expected. "Leaving?" "Yeah." Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed something fragile beneath the surface. "I've taken up too much of your space. You've done enough for me. It's time I move on." He blinked, searching for something to say. "You can stay until your ankle's healed." "It's fine," she said, even though it wasn't. She shifted slightly, and he saw the faint grimace she tried to hide. "I can manage." "Candace, no," she said softly but firmly. "You've been kind, Adrien. But this, all of this." She gestured around the gleaming penthouse, the wide windows, the marble floor. "It's not my world. I don't belong here." He crossed his arms, trying to steady the sudden wave of unease washing through him. "Belonging isn't about wealth or walls. Maybe not for you," she said. "But for me, it's about survival." Her words cut clean, quiet but unyielding. He realized then that what looked like pride was really armor, worn and battered, but necessary. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Back to my place. Well, what's left of it. The landlord said he'd hold my room until Friday if I could pay what's due." Adrien felt his chest tighten. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." There was no anger in her tone, just certainty. She hoisted her bag higher, the movement stiff. He wanted to stop her, to ask her to stay, but he couldn't. Every word that came to mind felt selfish. "All right," he said finally. "At least let me give you a ride." Candace hesitated, then nodded once. The drive was quiet. The city rolled past. Gray sidewalks, billboards, people rushing nowhere. Adrien stole glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She sat with her arms crossed, face turned toward the window, jaw tense. When they pulled up to her building, a small aging complex with paint peeling at the corners, she exhaled slowly, as if bracing herself. "This is it," she said. He looked at the cracked sidewalk, the crooked mailboxes. "You shouldn't have to live like this." "Maybe not," she said, "but I've lived through worse." He wanted to argue, to offer something. Money, a new place, help, but he knew she wouldn't take it. Candace Porter wasn't someone you saved. She was someone who refused to let herself be broken. She opened the door but paused before stepping out. "Adrien," she said quietly, "thank you. For the coffee, for the roof, for not treating me like I was some kind of charity case." "You're not," he said. "You never were." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then that makes you one of the few who sees me that way." And then she was gone. Adrien watched her limp toward the front door, her figure small against the city's chaos. The urge to follow her, just to make sure she got inside safely, burned through him, but he stayed where he was. She needed space, and maybe for once he needed to learn how to let go. When he finally drove back, the penthouse felt different. The air was too still, the silence too loud. Every trace of her, the mug by the sink, the folded blanket on the couch, felt like a ghost. He poured himself another cup of coffee, though. He didn't drink it. His phone buzzed. It was an email from his assistant, a reminder about an upcoming investor meeting. The world was still spinning, his empire still thriving, but for the first time, he didn't care. He turned off his phone and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, vast and indifferent. But all he could think about was a woman with tired eyes and a storm behind her smile. And though he tried to convince himself it was just empathy, something deeper whispered beneath the surface, something he didn't want to name. Because if it wasn't empathy, then it was something far more dangerous. And for a man who'd built his life on control, feeling was the one thing he could not afford. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of purgatory. Adrien returned to his usual routines, meetings that stretched into the night, Endless calls, dinners with people who spoke in profit margins instead of emotions. On the outside, he was fine. He always was. The press called him the machine, the man who never faltered. But when the lights dimmed and the noise faded, the quiet started to eat at him. He would find himself glancing at the guest room door, expecting to hear her soft footsteps or that quiet hum she made when she cooked. He'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and catch himself reaching for 2 mugs instead of 1. Her absence wasn't loud, it was hauntingly silent. 3 weeks after she left, a chance encounter cracked the distance between them. He was at a charity gala, the kind of event where everyone wore masks of philanthropy while discussing mergers over champagne. Adrien attended out of obligation, not interest. The air was perfumed with wealth and pretense. He stood near the back, nursing a drink he didn't want, when a familiar laugh cut through the room. He froze. It couldn't be, but it was. Candace stood near the stage, talking animatedly with a group of women. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but modest, and her hair framed her face in curls that caught the light. She looked radiant, confident, grounded, alive. Something inside him shifted. He didn't approach immediately. He watched her first. The way she smiled, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about something she cared about. He realized then how much lighter she seemed, free of the weight that had hung on her when she'd lived under his roof. When she finally noticed him, her breath caught. For a second, the crowd disappeared. "Adrien," she said softly when he approached, her surprise quickly melting into something gentler. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he replied. "I work for the nonprofit hosting this event," she said with a small smile. "We provide housing assistance for low-income families. I help with fundraising and outreach." He nodded, impressed, though a part of him stung with pride. "You look happy." "I am," she said simply. "It's not much, but it's mine." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like something I once said about my company." She laughed, a sound that still hit him right in the chest. "Then maybe we're both stubborn." They talked for a while about work, the weather, everything but the thing that truly lingered between them. But when the crowd thinned, the small talk ran out and silence found them again. "I wanted to call," Adrien said finally, voice low, "but I didn't know if it was appropriate." "You did the right thing," she said. "I needed time to figure out who I was without owing anyone anything." He nodded slowly, his throat tight. "And who are you now?" She met his gaze, steady, warm. "Someone who doesn't run from kindness anymore. Someone who knows what she wants." He took a step closer. "And what do you want to, Candace?" She hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "To stop pretending I don't think about you." The world seemed to narrow, pulling them into a quiet orbit of their own. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into nothing. "Then don't," he said. She smiled, shaking her head slightly. "You make it sound easy." "It doesn't have to be complicated," he murmured. "It just has to be honest." Candace looked at him for a long moment, searching his face like she was trying to see if this was real. If he was still the man who'd once pulled her out of the rain, or just another version of the billionaire the world saw. Finally, she said, "If we do this, Adrien, it has to be on equal ground. No debts, no rescues, just us." He nodded. "Then we start there." She smiled again, small but real, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something loosen in his chest. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't rush. Instead, they sat together near the balcony, talking until the staff started clearing the tables. It was quiet, easy, the kind of peace Adrien had been searching for without knowing it. As he walked her to her car, she stopped and turned to him. "You know," she said softly, "that night in the rain, it didn't feel like fate. It felt like a test." He frowned slightly. "A test?" "To see if you'd choose to be human again," she said. And before he could answer, she leaned forward, brushed a kiss against his cheek and whispered, "I'm glad you did." As she walked away, the night air settled heavy with meaning. Adrien watched her go, knowing this time he wouldn't try to hold her back. He didn't need to, because for the first time he understood. Love wasn't about saving someone, it was about seeing them, and she had seen him long before he'd ever seen himself. The city had a strange way of remembering storms. Weeks passed, and yet Adrien still found himself thinking of rain, the way it sounded against glass, the way it carried that electric quiet just before everything changed. It had been months since that night in November, the night his life had stopped being a sequence of numbers and turned into something frighteningly, beautifully real. Candace had kept her promise. She didn't move back in, not at first. She wanted to build something on her own terms, her career, her confidence, her sense of control. Adrien respected that. He learned patience in those months, learned what it meant to love without possession. He visited her often, bringing dinner to her small apartment, the one that smelled faintly of vanilla candles and ambition. She worked long hours at the nonprofit, helping people find their footing in a city that so easily forgot the lost ones. He watched her pour herself into that work, and he realized something humbling. Candace had saved far more lives than he ever could, even with all his billions. And somehow, she had saved him too. Still, part of him lived with quiet dread. He'd built his empire on control, precision, predictable outcomes. Love wasn't like that. It was risk, chaos, exposure. Every time she looked at him with those soft, knowing eyes, he wondered when the universe would come to collect payment for his happiness. That payment came one night in the form of a single phone call. It was nearly midnight when Candace called. Her voice trembled. "Adrien, I think someone broke into the office." He was out the door before she finished the sentence. The city blurred past as he drove, every muscle tight, his mind flashing back to that first night, the fear, the rain, the unknown. When he arrived, the front door of her small nonprofit office was cracked open. Police lights flashed red and blue across the building's brick facade. Candace stood on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped around herself, still in her work clothes. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "They took everything, the laptops, the donor files, even the emergency fund." Adrien pulled her close before she could say more. "It's all right. You're safe. That's what matters." She shook her head against his chest. "You don't get it. We can't run programs without that money. Families are counting on us." For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly, "Let me help." Candace pulled back. "Adrien, no." His tone was calm, steady. "This isn't about pity or power. It's about fixing what's broken. Together." She searched his face, looking for the strings that always came attached to generosity. But there were none, just him. He made a few calls that night, silent, efficient, the way only a man with influence could. By morning, the organization's accounts were restored, new security installed, the lost data recovered. Candace's colleagues called it a miracle, but she knew the truth. It wasn't a miracle, it was him. When she confronted him later that week, she was angry, but it wasn't the kind of anger born of betrayal. It was the kind that comes from being seen too deeply. "You can't just fix everything with money, Adrien." "I didn't," he said softly. "I fixed it with intention. Because what you do matters, and because you matter." Her voice broke. "You scare me sometimes." "Why?" "Because I don't know what I did to deserve you." He smiled faintly. "Candace, it's the other way around." That was the night she came back, not out of need, but choice. She packed up her apartment and moved into the penthouse, not as a guest or a debt, but as an equal. The rooms that had once echoed with emptiness filled with warmth, laughter, and life. He learned how to let go of control. She learned how to trust again. And then came the final shock, one even he didn't see coming. It was a quiet Sunday morning. She called him into the kitchen, holding a small white stick in her hand. Her eyes glistened, her smile trembling at the edges. "I was going to wait," she said, "but I can't. I need you to know now." For a second, he didn't understand. Then his eyes fell to the faint pink lines. A heartbeat later, the world tilted. He stared at her, stunned into silence. "Are you?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're going to be a father, Adrien." The words hit him like the first rush of rain on a dry street. Cold, shocking, cleansing. For years he had been terrified of connection, terrified of losing control. But as he wrapped his arms around her, feeling her heartbeat against his, all that fear washed away. He realized then that love wasn't about saving someone or being saved. It was about standing in the storm together, unguarded, unafraid. Months later, as the rain returned to the city once more, Adrien stood by the window, Candace asleep on the couch beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. His hand lingered over her stomach, feeling the faintest promise of a future he never thought he'd want. Outside, thunder rumbled softly. He smiled. Some storms don't destroy. Some storms begin everything. And that night, the billionaire who once lived above it all finally understood what it meant to live within it. Heart, rain, and all.